Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com presents the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com.
All right, hey everybody, welcome to episode 252 of the Strength Coach Podcast, the official podcast of Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com. All right, I'm your host, Anthony Wren, and the show notes are located at ContinueFit.com. It's where I keep all my resources. All right, today on the StrengthCoach.com Coach's Corner, I spoke to Coach Boyle about anti-rotation. Lately, he's had a couple Coach's Minute videos on Instagram, and just wanted to talk and go a little deeper, talk about some what the anti-rotation folks are saying to him, and just figure out some of his progressions and regressions on that. We also spoke about substituting the hang cleans for trap bar jumps. That was from a thread on StrengthCoach.com. For the Results Fitness University Business and Fitness segment, I'm on with Rachel Cosgrove to talk about business plans. That's another thing that we've been getting a lot of talk about on the StrengthCoach.com forum. We've had a lot of great input. Wanted to get hers. For the Functional Movement System segment, Frank Dolan is back on to talk about the why behind, this time, the trunk stability screen. Last episode was the rotary stability screen. For the Train Heroic Data-Driven Coaching segment, Adam Doughty talks to Tim Robinson about specificity. Again, this is part 2. Remember, check out trainheroic.com. Start your free 14-day trial. Let them know I sent you. They'll save 10% off your first year of the Train Heroic Pro or Elite Edition. For the BodyByBoyleOnline.com, hit the gym with the Strength Coach segment. I have Charlie Weingroff back on. This is part 2 of our 2-part series. This time we talked about how he uses the FMS, and I based it off of a video that he did that's on his website on charlieweingroff.com. I thought it was really interesting, so I wanted him to go deeper on that. Talked about some motor skill acquisition, his thoughts on the bilateral deficit, which was another video he did on his site. So he's got a lot of interesting videos that he goes in depth on a bunch of things. And then we finished off with his thoughts on the evolution of social media. Charlie's pretty active on social media, so I wanted to talk to him about how he's evolved on social media as well. Lots of things to get to, so let's get on the phone with Coach Boyle. All right, now it's time for the StrengthCoach.com Coach's Corner with Coach Boyle. StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information. You can try it out for 3 days, just a buck. You'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day asking and answering questions. Check it out at StrengthCoach.com. Coach, how you doing?
You know, I had the lamest, I always say the same thing. I'm doing great, Anthony. I guess it's because I am always doing great, but I feel like I should come up with something a little more creative. Sorry.
I think it's partially me. I mean, I like when I'm around people, they, things are good, man. They're feeling good. They're happy to be around me. So I could be part of it.
That's probably true. With me, but maybe I'm not sure if it's that way with everyone.
Yeah, there you go. Coach, you've been doing some of your coaches' minutes on anti-rotation, and today you had a good one. I think, like with the just in terms of you're always good with some of the analogies, but I like that whole idea. Like, look, certain joints, specifically in the spine, are deliberately constrained. We're not made for 360 degrees of rotation. You said we need to add anti-rotation exercise to buttress those passive restraints. And could you just so everybody knows, because I don't think I'm not sure if I've seen this anywhere in terms of your progressions and regressions in terms of where are you starting people off with anti-rotation? Just give us an idea. For people that don't really know, I obviously know some of your stuff, but for people that don't know what you specifically do for anti-rotation, could you talk about that?
Well, interestingly enough, I don't think we start off with anti-rotation, really. I think we start off with anti-extension and anti-lateral flexion and then progress to anti-rotation a lot of times, unless we go kind of, tall kneeling or standing anti-rotation press. I always say, I'm not saying Palloff press, and that might be the only time we really start with something right off the bat that is, in fact, anti-rotation. But I think it's when you start getting from 4 to 3 point type things that you start to incorporate anti-rotation. So when you start saying, okay, now I'm going to plank rows or plank reaches or things like that, that's where some of the anti-rotation starts to come in. Or even in some ways, simple McGill's bird dog, and we tend to be legs only. So we might call it a quadruped hip extension. So you're on all fours and you're extending your right or your left hip. I guess you could look at that as anti-rotation. I think that's the problem from a context standpoint is I really think that people don't understand, because some of the people that were arguing me or with me after the previous post were saying things like, haven't you looked at people swing a bat or baseball? And it's like thoracic spine rotation, hip internal external rotation, very little lumbar rotation. And that's what I got the idea, the sort of Linda Blair idea today for the exercise. Yeah. Maybe wasted probably on the old, but that idea that, you can't spin your head 360 degrees for a reason. There's a reason you can't just turn around and look behind you. And I really think there is a fundamental lack of understanding with a lot of people that I feel like in this was, I think it might even be tomorrow's post, so you might get ahead of this. But when I say I am for anti-rotation, it does not mean that I am anti-rotation.
Yeah.
When I said, if you're anti-rotation, does that mean you're pro-rotation? So it gets really complicated, but I'm not against people rotating. But what we're saying is, but we do need to develop the ability to control rotation. And the way you control rotation is with anti-rotation exercises. You develop the muscles that are used to prevent or control rotation. And this is where I think people fail to grasp it, because, people start thinking, well, the spine's got to move, you got to be able to bend. It's like, slow down, kids. That's not what we're saying. We're not saying that we want to turn somebody into this sort of rigid monster that can't move and can't bend and can't laterally flex and can't rotate. That's not what we want at all. What we want is, as we said, we want to develop the constraints that buttress those passive restraints. Mm-hmm. So somebody responded on my Instagram today and said, yeah, you have deliberately, there are like soft tissue, ligamentous, bony constraints to rotation. There's a reason that every segment only moves a certain amount. It's a very well-designed system that we try very hard to screw up. And that was what I tried to get into today, was this idea that there is an ideal range of motion for every joint. One of the things that I loved about the PRI myokinematics course was they put up hip ranges of motion and they said, okay, these are desirable ranges of motion. I forget what it was. It was something like, they wanted plus 10 hip extension and 45 degrees of internal and 60 of external, whatever the numbers were. The numbers don't matter. But the point was, in joints, there's a sweet spot that's good. And there's a spot below which not good, and above which is not good. And it's not a situation of just simply more range of motion is better, because what happens, and this is what they talk about in the myokin course, when you start to get somebody who can do a split, you're actually damaging the passive restraints. And that was something that I remember taking from that course, thinking, okay, yeah, we can be too flexible. I can remember Mike Reinhold, when I was working for the Red Sox, saying to me, just be careful. Some of the pitchers may not need to stretch. And I remember my initial thought was, what is he talking about? Everybody needs to stretch. And then I saw some of the pitchers and I was like, oh, not everybody needs to stretch. Because we had some really big, tall, lanky guys who were really hypermobile, and they were hypermobile everywhere. It wasn't just sort of, their right arm or their left arm, but these were guys that they're very kind of, whippy guys. They can sit in a big V and move around, and that's what allows them to be really good throwers. Yeah. But that system needs to be constrained, because that's why that same guy will tear his ulnar collateral ligament, or will tear his labrum, or will tear his rotator cuff, because they literally develop the ability to overpower their passive restraints. Yeah. And that's what we don't want to see people do. So I think, and it's so hard, and it's so much fun, and I said this yesterday, I was talking to a group, I don't know if this is translating into anything from a business perspective, but it's clearly getting more eyeballs on stuff. People are noticing, people are liking these 1-minute videos, and it's interesting because it makes you think, okay, how do I deliver this in a minute? And then sort of what's the follow-up. And it's really funny because Rudy Thomas yesterday was saying, don't respond to the trolls. You're playing into them. And I'm like, the trolls are the thing. Like they're the people.
The energy, the fuel.
Content. Right. They literally are. Okay, next piece of content is going to come from some idiot who responds to my Instagram. And what I realized after a couple of them, like I got trolled by a guy, and I looked at it, and he said, why didn't you respond to my last post? And I went and looked at his profile. He has never posted on Instagram in his life. He had 2 followers, and he's following 117 people. He's never put up a post himself. He has a private account. And I literally posted on the thing. I said, because you have 2 followers and a private account. That's why I didn't respond.
I also think, it's the man in the arena speech, right? Like, this guy's not posting. He's not in the arena. He doesn't deserve it. I understand you responding to trolls because, again, like you've talked about in the past, like, what if everything we've done is wrong? And, like, what if they're right sometimes, right? So if they can make you think on some of those levels, not all the trolls, as you know, but you know what I mean? Like, so if they can make you think, but somebody who doesn't post really doesn't deserve a response.
Right. You're exactly right. And I love the fact sometimes I read and I'm like, okay, I didn't explain that well enough. And that gives me the next post. But yeah, you do. Instagram is a very interesting place in terms of there's a lot of these guys with private accounts and relatively speaking, no followers who I think are only on Instagram to troll.
Yeah.
And they don't have their real name. They get names like Okie Dokie or whatever, and you're like, okay. Seriously, that was what the guy's name was the other day, something like that. And it was like, okay, this guy's giving me a hard time. And, I look at his account. It doesn't have his, no name, no occupation. I'm not responding to these guys. Yeah. I'm not going to bother with these people anymore. And so now what I've done, and I never blocked before, but on Twitter and with some of this stuff, I've gone and started blocking guys. I'm like, okay, these are people whose only real purpose is to do exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
And they all have an agenda. They're usually a disciple of somebody who's not a fan of me, and they're just there to disrupt.
Yeah, for sure. Coach, to stay on the anti-rotation, another thing that I think golfers who've at least taken some of the TPI stuff understand this is that there is a deceleration component from segment to segment. So, for example, the hips, they're supposed to get top speed first, and they transfer that energy to the arms, right, to the torso, I should say, and then that hits its top speed and releases it to the arms, which releases it to the club. And there is, and this is shown in the kinematic sequence graphs, so it's going to be the same for pitchers and the baseball swing or tennis swing, is that there's an element of deceleration. So it's important, like I always think of that, I don't know what you would call it, but the landmine, I just called it landmine anti-rotation that you've been doing for 10 years, over 10 years, where you're standing there like in an addressed position and you're going, your arms are straight and they're going back and forth. That's teaching you that's great. And that's talk about anti-rotation and talk about really teaching you to be able to absorb forces and absorb that to be able to decelerate. Because people think decelerate's a bad word, but it's not a bad word. It's just decelerating and transferring to the next segment.
You're right. You're 100% right. And I almost went, because I only had a minute, I almost wanted to talk about the analogy I always use in my seminars is, what if I started talking to you about wanting you to develop more knee range of motion in the transverse plane?
Yeah.
You'd be like, oh, that's an ACL tear. Like, we don't want knee range of motion in the transverse plane. And I'm like, it's not really different at the spinal segments. That's what you need to understand, is there are going to be times when you are going to be stressing passive restraints that you didn't want to, they weren't your target. And that's why he said this anti-rotation work, deceleration work. And then someone said in the Instagram follow-up today, maybe deceleration would be a better term and would make people less angry. But my thing is, I feel like this is where I get aggravated. If you haven't read McGill's book, if you haven't read Mechanical Low Back Pain, if you haven't read Sarman's book, I just feel like you shouldn't even be allowed in the argument. Like, okay, please don't even take a seat at the table if you don't really understand what the argument is about, because you realize with some of these people, the argument is they're not even correct. They're not even in the right argument. And they have really no idea what they're talking about. Yeah. So it's...
I don't think deceleration is going to work because I do think it's semantics, but I do think people will say, what are you talking about? Train slow, be slow. You don't want to decelerate. You know, it'll be just some stupid argument.
Exactly. Yeah, there's always, and that's what, the one thing, the cool thing about all of this stuff that we're doing is we're always in the wild, the wild, wild west. When you first said, hey, I want to do a podcast, you remember what my response was, right?
Yeah, I don't know what a podcast is, but I trust you. Let's do it.
And we have a really good podcast. We have one of the most highly regarded, highly listened to podcasts in the field. But I just went with you on it. You said, hey, we're going to do a podcast. I was like, okay. Sounds like some new social media thing. Supposed to be good for you. It's like life cereal. And you end up in that situation where you're doing it because it seems like the right thing to do. So we don't, and that's how it is like with these 1 minute Instagram videos. I don't know. I'm trying to figure out, okay, how do I deal with topics in a minute? How do I respond? How do I handle the comments? There's so much stuff to learn, but I love that part of it. I love the sort of learning, and I love the kind of being a little bit on the edge of some of these things.
Yeah, the 1 minute too, it makes you dial in your message in terms of like, it's always like, oh, what's your elevator pitch for your business, right? It's a similar idea. It's like, how do I get this across really quickly? Like you've talked about like some of Coach Wooden's coaching cues, do this, don't do that, do this. What's the quickest way to get this message across? So, and like you always talked about, if you can't explain it, you probably don't truly understand it. So if you probably can't explain it in that minute, maybe you need to figure out some more stuff, right?
Yeah.
But it's creating a lot of conversation on the site as well. It's giving us content, so it's all good.
Yeah. One of the guys that posted, actually, that was the quote that's on his wall of his Instagram thing, is that idea. If you can't explain it, you probably don't really understand it. And it's so true in terms of if you can't explain it simply so that a relatively whatever, a common man understands it, then you don't understand it.
Yeah, good stuff. Coach, we had Ray Tucker asked about, we were posting some of the Body by Ball online programs from summer 2018. We did athlete, high school. We did college and pro. We did, there were 4 days. We did a 2-day program. We did some adult programs. But Ray was asking about a 4-day college and elite. And one of the questions was, if you have somebody who can't hang clean, you have them perform some type of jumping in place or box jumps. You said we use trap bar jumps in the summer. In the past, we use kettlebell swings and our total gyms or MVP shuttles. Let's take away the total gyms or MVP shuttles because that's rare that people even have those. But can you talk about, have you taken out the kettlebell swing, or can you almost do the certified functional strength coach progression, regression with those trap bar jumps?
Well, I think I wouldn't say we've taken out the kettlebell swing, but I would say there are less people swinging. I think I like the trap bar jump because I think you can load it a little bit better. And I still think, yes, it is that progression, regression concept. It's a little bit about, okay, what is this guy? What does he like to do? What is he comfortable with? And trying to figure out. The thing I don't like is I don't love swinging really heavy kettlebells. And I know Brett has kind of talked about the fact that if you get sort of the right type of swing, you still can produce the power that you need to produce. But I have trouble with the idea that if I'm swinging a 28K, that I can really produce the same kind of power that I might by cleaning 300 pounds, for instance. Mm-hmm. And so with the trap bar jump, I feel like if the ability to load is there, we can load it a little heavier than maybe I might be comfortable with in the swing. So I would say the majority of guys last year who were not good Olympic lifters, which really was the majority of our pros, because most of them are not like career MBSC guys, were trap bar jumping.
But wait, what's the load on the trap bar jumps?
The load on the trap bar jump, so if we got to somebody like Eichel, 135. And Eichel could still get into that 70% of his vertical jump. So Eichel's like a 36-inch vertical. So he was getting, probably like 24, 25 inches with 135. But I think that's super heavy. We had most of the guys were probably in the like 75 to 90 range. where they could get, and what we were looking for was trying to get the right power output, something, and I said when we talked about this before, and we talked about it in the article, something in kind of Cam Joss's idea of basically 2/3 of their best vertical jump. That was going to tell me that we were kind of in the right spot loading wise. And the cool thing about 2/3 of their best vertical jump, using that as the indicator, is it looked right. It passed kind of the eye test, the shit test, whatever. Whereas when people started saying 50% of your trap bar deadlift, now you're talking about a guy like Eichel. You might have been saying, okay, let's jump with 225. And you start looking at that and you're looking going, I don't, it doesn't look right. It doesn't look safe. It doesn't give me the eye test piece that I really want to pass.
Yep. But you compared the kettlebell swing weight to the clean weight, because the kettlebell swing, you would be doing really what I think Brett Jones said the research was indicating at about 30%. So these guys are in the neighborhood of let's say 200 pounds, a lot of them, the pros. So that would be, about a 28K, like you said.
Right. What's 28K, 56 pounds?
Closer to 60.
60, yeah. So, but it ends up probably being about half the weight, 3/4 of the weight. So I guess it's just we could go a little heavier and be more comfortable for me, I guess. And that's all it really is. So much of this, I always say, is about your individual lens and your ability to look. So I start looking at some guys and thinking, when I start getting guys swinging 36s, I'm like, is that what I really want? And maybe it is. I don't know. And it would be interesting to see sort of what a guy like Brett's reaction is in this, when he hears the podcast. Would he be like, yeah, if you got a guy who's strong and has got a 30+ inch vertical jump, I'd be great with him swinging at 36. I don't really know. So it's, I guess I wouldn't consider myself a kettlebell swing expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I know as they get heavier, I do get a little less comfortable, and maybe that's just me.
Yeah, no, I think Brett would agree with you on that anyway. Like, it might be too heavy. Because I've seen, obviously, what's the goal? But I think he would go with you on that one too. So, and it wouldn't pass the shit test. So, good stuff. All right, Coach, we're gonna let you go on that note. So, thanks again for doing this, and we'll talk to you next time.
All right, thanks, Ant.
All right, guys. Right now, at Perform Better, they have 20% off their best sellers, including med balls, foam rollers, ropes, dumbbells, kettlebells, you name it. All the best sellers, 20% off. The next Learn by Doing one-day seminar is in Nashville on March 30th. That's with Ian Jeffries, Martin Rooney, and Bill Parisi. After that, it's Baltimore on April 13th with Gray Cook, Josh Hinkin, and Alan Cosgrove. Great lineups on both of those days. Don't forget the Perform Better Functional Training Institute as well. Speaker School, April 4th to 6th. Functional Strength Coach 7 with Coach Boyle. That actually might be sold out. It's called Change is Good. You go first, April 28th. And then on May 18th, Guy Massey, Developing the Modern Athlete and Client. Check out performbetter.com for all their products and info on their educational seminars. All right, now it's time for the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment. I'm here with Rachel Cosgrove. Rachel, thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
All right, well, we're continuing this kind of idea that you and I started with kind of me interviewing you, like really just with one or two questions, but instead of just having you guys come up with the topic, some of the things that we're seeing on strengthcoach.com, I wanted to get you guys on here to talk about those things specifically. And one of them is business plan. And this is always one of those things where I think people get really intimidated, number one, and think it's going to have to be this long, drawn-out process. But at the same time, there's a lot of holes a lot of times, like where do we get the information? So let's just start out by really talking about with your clients at Results Fitness University, what do you recommend for people? And talk to us about how you start them out with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So a business plan is something that as you start your business, you're going to absolutely need to put together for a landlord, or if you are getting funding to give to your bank to show them that you've thought this through, you know what you're doing, and you have a plan in place. And so one of the biggest mistakes I see a lot of people make is a lot of times they write their business plan with everything that they need. So like laying out for their landlord exactly what they need and laying out for their bank all the money they need. need, and not thinking about everybody's favorite radio station, WIIFM, what's in it for me. And so always, as you're putting together your business plan, consider that if a landlord's going to be giving you the keys to his building, think about his perspective and what are you offering him. So that way you can make it a win-win, and make sure the business plan is laid out that way, that you're including, things that are going to make him feel like secure in giving you the keys to, to take over his building. And so that's part of why you need a business plan. The things that you want to include in it, you want to have an overview of what it's going to cost, what your base operating expenses are going to be. But then I think one of the most important things is why you? Like, why are you different? What are you offering that's different, that's, in your community? How are you going to, really create a place that's going to help people that are, there's not another business that is currently helping them. So really, setting yourself apart, an explanation of your gym, the atmosphere, the clients, the services, the employees, the culture, really all of that. And just an overall breakdown of the estimated costs to open, your proposed financing, what your monthly budget looks like, and then who's going to own and operate it, and an overall summary of, what the game plan looks like.
Mm-hmm. One thing I think I heard my buddy Frank Dolan, who's on the podcast doing the FMS segments, is he was coming from an existing kind of business, which a lot of us are, right? We have a bunch of clients and we decide. And what he did was he got a bunch of signed contracts, like going to the bank. So he said, like, look, I have 25 people committing, let's say, just say $100, whatever, $100 a month, and that's $2,500, that we're going to have right off the bat a month. And we know it's obviously going to be more than $100 for people, but to have those signed contracts is to say, hey, here is this security for you. But what I wanted to ask you about was, you said what's in it for them. Really, like, if we look at it from a landlord's perspective, what else are you just saying besides, hey, look, I'm giving you rent? Like, that's what's in it for you.
I'm giving you rent, but yeah, like that you do have your costs thought out, right? That you've, like if it is for a bank too, what are you putting up, right? Like, so you're going to have to probably put up some kind of, collateral equity, what's your share, right? So I think, and for a landlord especially, like, you're like, a lot of times you want to, work with them on build out or work with them on, you want to get as much as possible for them to cover, and you want to get them to cover a couple months rent for sure. So how can you, offer them, hey, here's some of the stuff we're going to be doing with your space. We're going to be making sure it's very, high end. If you are paying for some of the build out, maybe, how you're going to do that, that you're going to take care of their space and you're going to make sure, you're going to be a good tenant. And like you said, having contracts in place, that shows your landlord that, hey, look, I already have people committed, so I already know I can pay the rent, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, where do we get those numbers? Like, so for example, people say, how do I get the projections? How do I know? Like, obviously, if you're starting out with 25 people, you could say, okay, our growth rate will be X amount based on this marketing plan. But where do you kind of talk to them about, like, kind of what they would call, like, the pro forma, right? The numbers, the numbers that you're planning on having for the next, 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think, definitely for in the business, in income wise, like how much to project what you're going to make. The first year, 2 years, even 3 years, you're going to have, substantial growth because you're growing your business. So you're going to see, probably a, 10% increase, 15% increase. Like you're going to, and definitely you can put those numbers into projections of, okay, I'm planning to sign up, 10 new members a month. And then, using like an Excel spreadsheet, you can definitely, over time figure out, okay, where will I be in 2 years or 3 years, which, 10 new members a month should be pretty reasonable if you have a good marketing plan in place. So that's something that, you could definitely project out depending on what you're charging, and that kind of thing. As far as the expenses, looking at the rent, your two biggest expenses are your rent and payroll. So that's always your two biggest expenses in running a business. So what kind of payroll are you going to have? Are you going to be hiring people right away? Are you going to be a one-man show for a while? Figuring out what does your payroll look like and what's it made up of. I recommend including some kind of administrative assistant or office manager in there pretty early. Really think that through. How can you afford somebody who can take care of the back end so that as you grow, you have, somebody really making sure things are going to continue to run smoothly. So those are your two biggest expenses. And then, of course, looking at, the other expenses of, if your lease doesn't include electricity, trash, insurance, these are the other kinds of things you want to look at to get an idea of, what it's going to cost you to run your gym.
Very cool. There's a good book about numbers in the fitness business, 55 Fitness Business Strategies for Success. How can people get that book?
Yeah, head over to resultsfitnessuniversity.com, and we'll actually shoot you out a free copy when you sign up for our email newsletter. So head on over to resultsfitnessuniversity.com.
All right. Awesome. Rach, thanks for doing this.
Thank you.
All right, welcome to the Functional Movement System segment. And again, we're doing something a little bit different here with me coming on instead of just having the guys and the gals talk about some of the things with functional movement systems with what they're doing. And I have on again Frank Dolan. Frank, thanks for doing this.
Yep, sure. Thanks for having me.
Frank is an FMS instructor. And like I said, last episode, we first started looking at the FMS when we went to Athletes Performance in 2005. And Frank's been on a journey ever since, using it in his facility and had some really good results with the whole system, not just the functional movement screen. And we're talking about last episode about just some of these patterns, the whys behind the patterns, and how sometimes people tend to look at a pattern and think it's only the screen. They're going to look at the screen and think it's only for that specific thing. And one of them, this happens a lot with the trunk stability push-up. People think, okay, I'm good at push-ups, I should be good at this, or this is just going to help their push-up. So Frank, give us an overview of this screen and talk to us about the why.
Sure. Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head with that example. I mean, there's two tests in the movement screen that are actually the same names as exercises. So you have the trunk stability push-up and also the inline lunge. So easily in our industry, and we're so exercise focused and exercise based, we're going to immediately go to, if somebody doesn't do well on the lunge, they're not good at the actual lunge exercise, or if they don't do the push-up well, they're not good at doing push-ups. But I've had the example of people being able to bench press a bunch of weight, be able to do, over 15 push-ups, but not pass the trunk stability push-up test. So what does that say about that actual test? The test, or the screen, is really not just testing the push-up, but it's testing reactive sagittal plane stabilization. Like, can the person's core kick on? Or first of all, can they get in that position and get in that shape on the ground? And then can they reactively stabilize when they go to push from that kind of compromised hand position at either their forehead or chin or clavicle, depending on the test and gender. So what we see with that is, and I think what is important to keep in mind is, how can we simplify this for the client? Where in their daily life are they going to need to be able to buffer forces in that sagittal plane? And I think, things like holding kids, being able to hold a child and not go into excessive extension and reactively be able to move around. And that's kind of your day-to-day example, to someone, pushing a sled in training, and doing something, high threshold like that, and not go into their low back every time they go ahead and put force into something in front of them. You could also look at that from a lineman example of, they're going to be buffering a whole lot of force off of an opposing player. And just because they pass the trunk stability push-up, I want to be clear, that doesn't mean that they're going to be able to take on certain levels of strength and power. But again, just like the trunk stability push-up in last episode, we want to check the box, just make sure that's clear before we go ahead and do certain movements in training and really just kind of tie in those day-to-day activities and high performance sporting activities that they're going to do. So I had a gymnast even a couple of nights ago came in, and she was coming off a therapist. So I was comfortable working with her that, she was dealing with some back pain, wasn't currently in pain. I wouldn't want to be working with her in that type of situation, but kind of was dealing with the chronic back and forth pain. Scored really well on every single movement, like 2s and 3s across the board. The one thing she failed was the push-up. And, if you think of even, you have that pushing motion, which we get so focused on, but then think of a gymnast landing, coming off of the rings and landing hard on their feet, jamming their heels into the ground, forces drive through their knees, through their hips, into their low back. Like if they're not able to just do a simple push-up with their hands at chin height and bring their hips and shoulders up at the same time, I doubt they're really buffering that force very well. And there's a lot of other factors here, the volume that they're training at, and also just strength levels in other areas of the body. But I think when we test for this, we just want to make sure we're looking at it not just for the pattern of the actual test, but what does that say about that athlete or that client if they can't lift their hips and shoulders up at the same time.
Frank, would you, like, for example, though, really quick, I mean, I was thinking, some people would blow that off and be like, hey, listen, it's, a young female, doesn't have good upper body strength, which is, crap. But especially you got a gymnast there, so you're not going to be able to use that excuse. Would you start to think, when you were looking at that and said she couldn't do this, was that like more of a red flag because she was a gymnast and because she has a lot of this, like a higher level of strength, and not like she wasn't a soccer player that maybe like a young female soccer player who might not be doing a lot of upper body? Soccer players are traditionally known not to, for the most part, especially in high school, working out. Would you look at those two and think, holy cow, red flag for the gymnast, or would you have to do different things, different screens for somebody like the soccer player?
Yeah. So that's a really good question. I think it comes to the nuance of the level of the coach that's kind of looking at these things, because that kind of takes it to another level a little bit, where I'm looking, okay, so this is someone who's strong, can lift their own body weight, can do pull-ups and put themselves through the demands of being a gymnast, but they don't have that. I think the simplest way to look at it, just kind of go across the board so that this is accessible for everybody, is to just look at those ones and say that's the issue and that's where we got to move forward. And just always thinking back, like, how can we make this simple? How can we communicate it and tie it back to their goals? Like, her goal is to perform well. We got to kind of talk about durability with it. If you want to perform well, you want to practice the amount of volume you're practicing, we've got to make sure that you're durable enough to withstand that. And right now, what do you think about not being able to do a push-up? Actually, the example, she was actually in a full kneeling position. And I said, how comfortable would you feel right now if I threw this heavy Dynamax ball over your head? And how comfortable would you feel about catching that right now? And in that tall kneeling position, that's a position that she's getting in on a regular basis, through life and in her sport. Obviously, there's other factors as far as the volume and issues there, with the amount of practice time, but at least we do what we can on the movement side to make sure we're checking the box. We know it's not going to end well if there's a 1 on the push-up.
Yeah. Frank, it's a good point that you actually just brought up about almost like buy-in and like looking at their goals, and the way you just kind of did that little role play of talking to her about understanding with the screen and how important some of these things can be in her language. So we're going to get you on next time. And I want to talk to you a little bit about buy-in and how we talk to our clients, our athletes, our adult clients, et cetera, when we're using the screen. So thanks for coming on and doing this.
Sure. You got it, Ant.
Hey, this is Adam.
And this is Tim.
Welcome to the Train Coach Data-Driven Coaching segment.
Yeah, baby.
So, Tim, let's follow up on our last talk about specificity.
Ooh, love
and
it.
do specificity part 2, because we only got 3 minutes at a time. So,
sounds good.
We touched on last time how the question was really about transfer. Like, hey, is that thing you're doing going to actually make them a better athlete in whatever sport it is they're participating in?
Right.
So, we can go down the rabbit hole and talk about like the joint angles and the muscle action and the velocity.
Quarter squats, baby.
All that stuff, right? So, yeah, you would say but the question is, so when do you do those things?
Yeah.
And actually, like, I hear them talked about a lot, but I don't see them done in practice nearly as often.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think there's a reason that the guys who are big on basics are big on the basics.
Yeah.
So if you have an elite thrower, for example, I might really want to do quarter squats to that person.
Yeah.
And because that joint angle is more specific. That the leg strength on the block is important. So anyway, go ahead and
So you kind of touched on that, and it's really like, when do you get specific, so to speak, and we learn as interns, really early on in our careers that, you start off with GPP, then you go to hypertrophy, then you move to strength, speed, power. I go on a pre-competition, and we learn that, but it never really seems to work out that way, Adam. And it's an interesting question of why, and I think it's based off of a bunch of different factors, and no one's periodization is going to be perfect to that.
I think that part of the difference is, if we go and you take the Russian extreme example where you're like controlling athletic development
from age 6
to 16 or whatever. And you can lay out these like annual cycles where everything is perfectly controlled and they're trying to get really good and be an Olympian. Right?
Exactly.
Or if you just take a less extreme example and you're training an Olympian, they know they've got to be good at certain times and they're committed to the sport as their profession, essentially. Now, that's different from having, say, your high school sophomores coming in.
We get this question all the time at Train Heroic is, coaches reach out and they say, the platform's great, but where is your football-specific programming? And my response is, well, tell me what that would look like, coach. And in my experience, I could take a 14-year-old basketball player, put him in the 14-year-old football player's program, and you're going to get very similar results. You know what I mean? And the fact that most high school athletes, the majority, are multi-sport athletes over multiple seasons.
So, let's not ignore the fact that, let's say I do full squats, right? Squats to parallel by most people's definition, right? Is like, it's not that doesn't improve, like my RFD at whatever speed is necessary for throwing. It's just that it doesn't do it to quite the degree as doing like the specific range of motion, right? So when you're nowhere near your ceiling, like you haven't tapped into any of those games, like there are more general benefits of squatting deeper, saying like, it's like large range of motion might be better for hypertrophy, might be better for like my overall mobility, right? So there are other benefits and other reasons you might just be big on the basics, I think.
Absolutely, and it's okay towards the end of careers, your athletes' careers, to get away from some of those things to increase to give them a better chance of staying on the field.
Or if you got to peak for a couple weeks for like top performance, it gets a little more complicated if your season is months long, obviously. So that's going to do it for us today. Be sure to go to trainheroic.com to start your 14-day free trial. When you're talking to one of our representatives, tell them the Strength Coach podcast sent you for 10% off a year of the Pro or Elite Edition.
All right, now it's time for the BodyByBoyleOnline.com. Hit the gym with the Strength Coach segment. Become an insider to Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning with staff meetings, in-services, and complete access to the MBSC programs. We are talking with Charlie Weingroff. And, we did part 1 last time. This is part 2. So, Charlie, thanks again for coming on.
What's up, man? Round 2, right?
All right, here we go. All right, so just to recap really quick, we were talking about your years at Canada basketball now has been almost a decade, and this idea of, I don't want to say building your team, but building your team and doing it the right way and kind of working with professional athletes and then kind of got into some of the this idea about training sports skills. Coach Boyle has been doing some stuff recently on this idea about sports specific, which you pretty much basically just agreed with him. Like, look, just do your thing in the gym and do it as best you can for the most part, and it's going to help. Don't try to train those sports skills under fatigue. Like specifically, it's going to be a problem. So I do want to kind of talk a little bit more about these sports skills and motor skill, because we're going to ask you about some FMS stuff and how you use the FMS. You did a great video on your site and on the FMS site, but that I think is also important to talk about. But with motor skill and obviously it's different than sports skills, but a lot of times, we feel like we're preparing somebody for their sport, and it does seem like people want to get into a little bit more specific. You have a term that you coined about golf, don't be too golfish. But how can we as trainers kind of work on motor skills to help our athletes for sports?
I think probably going back to the previous interview, to add to your summary, which was correct, just handle what you do in the gym, is if there is an interest in skills for a specific sport, well, then there's probably 2 things that should pervade the training program. Number 1, we should have great analysis of the demands of the sport. So that means work to rest ratio, and then secondly, that means what muscle groups are primarily being used. And then we should then make that part of that's like the values of the program, where if we just do a whole bunch of good exercises and we try to hit as many different really, really good boxes as possible, we are overall making a generally a more athletic individual. For many, many situations, that is the correct situation. In my opinion, when there is one sport, meaning there's one specific set of skills that are required, if we're not focusing on only those movements and those energy system profiles, then perhaps we are no longer making them better at their sport. We're just making them a better athlete. There will be situations that I think that's the case. So I don't think anything changes in terms of if we really want to work on their skills, but it's finding the work capacity for the sport. And again, the reason that you want work capacity for the sport and why you absolutely have to be consistent with what they're doing with their tennis coach has to be consistent with what you're doing in the weight room. And now it's like almost impossible to actually make these connections, because if there's a work to rest ratio because the tennis coach is stupid, and we're training more intelligent work to rest ratios in the gym, they're not prepared. Their movement skills will become inconsistent and potentially deteriorate while they're practicing. So we did not get them into enough shape, for this unintelligent sports skill session. So it's about making those links. And then we got to just make some very difficult decisions where what is good for a general athlete, if it has nothing to do with what they do in their sport, then we might have to make some changes to the program and take out things that are really, really good ideas for an athlete, but maybe not the best idea for someone that has to do the same thing over and over and over again. It's okay to have less exercises. It's okay to have less variability, particularly when that athlete reaches an elite performer level.
That's always an interesting question. Yeah, I think, in terms of, okay, like we'll take golf, for example, right? That's what you're really, over and over again.
Yeah.
And do we kind of, especially with that elite level, do we kind of go in that direction and make, I guess, is an asymmetry okay? Because they're definitely going to be asymmetrical there with some movement. Is that okay? Do we feed into that, or do we kind of try to fix that like in other?
I would. So we could use golf as an example because again, I feel very confident that I can talk about that particular sport. Number one, I don't find that those asymmetries are as big as they're made out to be. That's number one. Mm-hmm. Are they there? Yes, but there's other sports that have way more profound inherent asymmetries. So the first step is I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but the work to rest ratio of golf is like really, really favorable. Okay, like 1 to 300 or something. Let's say 18 holes. So let's say you're terrible. How many times are you doing this maximal effort rotation? So let's say you're terrible, so you shoot over 100, but remember you have to putt at least 18 times. So you're going to get into these very, very favorable work to rest ratios. So now you're going to think, okay, so I should be pretty good at staying ahead of this. If I do 1 to 20, I'll probably be good to go in terms of work. That's why you see what appear to be very heavy or out of shape golfers, which you also see in baseball, because they don't have great it's not required to have this type of fitness. However, when you're on the range or in the cage in baseball, your work to rest ratio is very, very similar to other sports. So think about if you dumped out your bag of balls on the range and you hit one, and then how long would it take for you to take your club, pull the ball over to you, bend down and put it on the tee, and then set up and hit a bomb? We're at 1 to 3 now. We're at 1 to 4. Yeah. How long does it take? So to take those concepts of if you now get fatigued you're no longer practicing the same skill anymore. You're practicing this other skill with all this spontaneous electrical activity. That's why we are inconsistent in the game of golf. So that's the first thing that we should really understand. And that I have the numbers if somebody wants me to send it to them. It's fine. I presented it at the World Golf Fitness Summit a few months ago in Orlando. The other thing is, okay, well, what do you do in golf? Okay, well, we rotate, we hinge, we do so explosively. Those are the primary three. Of course, we shift weight from right to left in the frontal plane under transverse circumstances. So I don't really know what else there is. Like we hinge, we rotate, and we do so explosively. So every exercise, in my opinion, should be geared to those work-to-rest ratio qualities, which is incredibly, incredibly alactic. And we should find as much things that we can do that involves hinging, that involves rotating, and does so explosively. So the primary activities for golf, in my opinion, should be Olympic lifting, because we're hinging and we are and we're doing so explosively, and med ball. And then everything else will be a little bit more general. Well, what about all of the mobility and stability? That's a different workout. That's a different that's what we do at a different time, because all of those things are crucial. But that's more training neurological fitness, a neurological zones, if you will, of that your body will have the variability to be able to do a lot of different things so that it can be less costly to just do one thing. That's very, very different than these energy systems and these force velocity profiles. That's now I consider that an elite performer program, which is very, very different than having this very, very functionally dense program where you get good at a whole bunch of really, really good things. Again, for most people, that's the right thing to do. But there is a point that when you look at an elite performer that only has to do one thing, and there's no significant, injuries or anything, and they're just 26-year-old MVP candidate, I think having less exercises that reflect the movements of their sport might be a more efficient way where now everything is funneled into what they do and how they do it.
Excellent. Yeah, I think it originally, you make it sound so simple, right? Like with the golf, for example, like, hey, it's hinging, it's rotating, and it's moving explosively. So find things that are.
The problem with golf is not so much that, it's that they want to focus on, your shoulder stability and all this other stuff. And those, I remember I said those things are crucial. But if you're doing push presses, you're working on shoulder stability. If you're throwing med balls, you're working on all these different things. I have no problem with a motor skill package, but that's different than what we're doing with trying to train energy systems and force velocity.
Yeah. Charlie, I want to move into, you had a great video on your site on charlieweingroff.com about how I use the FMS. And part of the reason why I wanted to talk about it was just because I think you did a great job. You had a great example of kind of connecting everything. And you were talking about, some of the things that you'll ask and, when someone wants to do this type of, get into the FMS, what does your program look like? What's important to you? And you used a great example with the rear foot elevated split squat. So you said if someone felt like that move is important for, basketball, then, you're going to look at, can the joints get into this position needed for that exercise? And then, how are you using the FMS? Could you just go over that rear foot elevated split squat example and kind of just summarize that video that you were talking about?
Well, yeah, I think one of the mistakes that gets caught up with any kind of evaluation model is that it becomes more important than your end state. So let's say if we are going to talk about the FMS, there is no discussion about the FMS until you tell me what are we FMSing for. Because the goal of the FMS is to evaluate, can joints get into the right positions to absorb and adapt to stress. So what are those positions? So now you're closing that loop, because we're saying those positions are reflected in rear foot elevated split squat. Now, there's a lot of different ways to coach rear foot elevated split squat. How much of a angled tibia are you going to use in the front? Are you going to coach them with a planar flexed foot on the bench or the pad behind you, or dorsiflex? Now, we all have opinions, but there's nothing mechanically wrong, with any of those choices. But let's say we're going to be planar flexed in the on the rear side, and we're going to allow the knee to drift forward over the second and third toes on the front side. So it'll be an angled tibia on the front side. And then we also should talk about like how we're going to load this thing. Are we going to hold the dumbbells or kettlebells at our side? Are we going to have a safety squat bar? All of these, like your FMS doesn't stand up anymore if we don't know what are we screening for? Like, what do I need to know? Because then you can put the FMS and what it tells you into great perspective. Because if your joints can get into the right positions, well, then you train the holy hell out of them and you stop. If they can't get into the right positions and you change positions, you eliminate joints, and you do active versus passive, which is the correct way to do the FMS. You don't just look at the top 7. You'll then find sometimes the joints can get into the right position, but other times that they can't. You can run some of your motor skill training, or you should be able to coach them, because if the joints can get in the right positions, you should probably be able to coach them, even if it's a complex vertical skill. If the joints never get into the right positions, now we've got to run some mobility training, which is a different environment than motor skill training. Motor skill is about putting them in positions to fail so that they can learn to not fail anymore, because they do have the ability to do it. They just don't have the skill. If it's mobility, they don't have the ability. So now we probably have to find different positions that value time under tension and just hang out and use different strategies so that the body can adapt its collagen to allow the joint a chance to get into the right positions. And then you change positions, eliminate joints, active versus passive. And if there's still pain, well, then we should run a different form of evaluation to make sure that we understand what that pain is and then decide what to do. Okay? So once you get to those, all those, you're going to get to 4 potentially different endpoints when you run the FMS correctly. But you may find that you have to run a rehab or a physical therapy or healthcare model for your shoulder. But when we go back to rear foot elevated split squat, we're just looking to do body weight. This is like week 1, 8 reps. So I don't really care if your shoulder hurts when you're doing, because your shoulder doesn't hurt when you do rear foot elevated split squat. So we can do some rehab things instead of our pressing, but we can still do rear foot elevated split squat. So now, are our feet ever symmetrically aligned with both feet on the ground? No. So I don't care what my deep squat tells me. And we have, is one foot on the ground while the other one is off the ground in like the hurdle step? No, that never happens aside from the transition of setting up the rear foot elevated to get your foot back onto the pad. Mm-hmm. So you might have some interest for hurdle step, and I'm only saying that for the nitpicking. Like that's not your foot is. That's for one of the arts of debate is just say what your opponent is going to say before they say it, and then they'll be quiet. Now, are both feet connected to the ground in some way in an asymmetrical stance? Well, yes, that's exactly what's happening. So I've got a lot of interest in what the inline lunge is telling me, because that's our motor strategy for those 3 different lower body movements is very, very different when you put your legs in all these different positions. So can I reach the depth? Can my knee touch the board? If my knee can touch the board, I probably have enough, provided I've set up the rear foot elevated correctly. Different people with different levers of the femur and tibia, they can't all go off of a bench. For me, I needed the Perform Better to make the adjustable one so that I could put my foot on the bottom. Otherwise, my knees would hurt. My back knee would hurt when I would do rear foot elevated. because it was just too high for me. It wasn't that I couldn't do the movement. As part of if I have a 2, then I should probably be okay. But I probably should also test ankle dorsiflexion, because the front foot, if I'm going to allow the tibia to glide forward, I'm also going to test dorsiflexion. So I don't know if FMS proper is there yet, but I know for a long time I've been doing 7 movements and the ankles anyway. So I'm pretty sure that we're the FMS is at that point. So if you're only doing 7 movements and you're finding that, man, like this shouldn't be, they're 2s, but they have terrible dorsiflexion, because you can still get 2s on squat, on hurdle step, and inline lunge, and still have limited dorsiflexion. So we should be looking at dorsiflexion plus the 7 movements, and then if there's other like fundamental capacity screen, etc. There's lots of reasons there. So now, if I'm holding my arms at my side, I can have a 1 in my shoulder mobility. A 1 in shoulder mobility isn't good, but it has no impact if you're holding something at your side. Mm-hmm. So it's about demonstrating that like you're not paralyzed. But none of this would make sense if we didn't have this firm endpoint. Do I ever need my spine to be stable while one leg is flexed while the other one is extended? Yes. So I need to have active straight leg raise be of a certain level. Well, it's a 1. Okay, you're not sunk. When it's a 1, you change positions, eliminate joints active versus passive. Can they touch their toes sitting? Okay, well, they're probably fine. It's more of a motor. Just because they can't do it on their back, but they can demonstrate other positions. Like that's what the FMS is. Like no one does this. Like or very few people it's not wrong to challenge this model, but like if you can touch your toes in sitting, you should probably be able to you can change that 1 to a 2 or a 3 very, very quickly. It's not a fault. It just means the person doesn't know how to use the model correctly. Do I need a stable spine? Now, trunk stability push-up, you could argue that you need for every movement that you're loading. If you're not sure, just put them on their back and bring their knees up to hook line. Is the back flat? Is that the spine that you would see during the trunk stability push-up? Yes? Well, then they have the ability to keep it. They just don't have the skill. And a lot of times it's just strength. But I would like to be able to see that they can actually keep their spine neutral while they're in the rear foot elevated. Well, I need to know that if I can coach this. I need to know that if my cueing and my loading as a strength coach is going to be enough, or do I need to go backwards into some of these regressions like motor skills? And then rotary stability. I don't know that the new rotary stability is public yet, where it's only an ipsilateral pattern. So if you were going to rear foot elevated split squat, left foot forward, left foot loaded, yes, I would be interested in rotary stability. If I was going to have symmetrical load or load on the opposite side, then the rotary stability probably wouldn't apply. So you should be able to see the joint positions in any number of the 7+1 FMS movements in your exercises. And if you can do them, then you do those. But if there are some joints that are not able to get into the right positions, you just do different exercises that the body can be complementary towards. So that's kind of how that's how I would like to look at it.
Yeah, connecting it. Yeah, and again, I'll remind everybody. Charlie goes much deeper. It's about a half-hour video on charlieweingroff.com, and just go to the articles section. Is that Rumble?
Rumble wanted to be on camera.
Nice. I got Emma sleeping right here next to me.
Okay.
Charlie, let's talk bilateral deficit. Coach Boyle's been kind of going back and forth lately as well with some people on social media, which I think we're going to finish with later, and your take on social media. But talk to me about, because you're somebody who's squatted heavily in the past with obviously done national rankings, etc. But you still believe in single leg training. So talk to us about your take on this idea about bilateral deficit and bilateral squats and single leg squats and single leg deadlifts, etc., etc.
All right, so common topic here. The first, like, sometimes, like, if you what's the cliche? Like, if you can't explain it in like an elevator pitch, then it's not consistent. I have one word to describe the bilateral deficit and all that is discussed about it. It is compelling. It is absolutely compelling in my mind. Now, that doesn't mean, that has nothing to do with do this exercise and don't do this one. If we're going to start to talk about the bilateral deficit, it is compelling in my mind. On T equals R3 at one of the sidebars, we pulled out the Just Jump mat, and I'm like, everybody who wants to do this, and it wasn't very scientific. If I had to do it over again, everybody would have had their hands on their waist. So everybody did vertical jump. And I think, and then everybody did left foot hop, and then everybody did right foot hop. So let's say there was like 12 people that did it. 11 had a bilateral deficit, meaning that their vertical jump on two legs was less than the two right and left combined. That to me is compelling. So I think the first step is when we talk about if the bilateral deficit is this primary foundation to this discussion, it is indefensible. Like it is 100% absolutely true that if we add what we can do on one leg plus the other leg, it will be more than what we do on two legs. The one dude in the DVD who did not show bilateral deficit, I think had a 36-inch vert. So perhaps his unique training, was, that was the reason. So I think we went like 11 out of 12 or 12 out of 13. So with that in mind, is there a suggestion that the force production is if we do 2 repetitions? So now we got to talk about time. Okay, well, I don't have time to do 2 reps. I can't do double the amount of reps in my program. Okay, that's your reason. But that doesn't mean the bilateral deficit is wrong. That means that you just don't value it as much as you value time. But when you do 2 repetitions, you are inherently using less weight on the body, lowest system load, to achieve these 2 repetitions. So if I do 1 repetition with lower system load, I am of the opinion that I have less chance to injure myself, or the injury will be less demonstrative if I have less weight on my body. If I'm carrying less of something, well, then I'll probably have less of a demand if something goes wrong or something goes sideways. So that to me is also a very, very valuable thing to understand, because no one can single leg, whatever they can do on 2 legs. I hope people aren't arguing that. That's yeah. So those are 2 things that I think are very much realities. Now, remember I said before, you got to take the art of debate. If I put less something on top of my body, well, then I probably am leaving some adaptation on the table, which would be skeletal adaptations. So if I, as someone that has, had a lot of weight on my back at certain times in my life, both figuratively and literally, so think of, if I put a bar on my back and it's this axial load, at some point my body has to adapt, and that adaptation could potentially be skeletal. So my bones will become different. They might not be bigger, but they might have other things that won't make them break. And those could be of the spine. I kind of like the idea of bones being stronger to not break. That should sound like it's something that's desirable. and obviously that would then extend through the pelvis and the hips, etc. Bones that are stronger, and I'm not even sure we have the ability to adapt to bone without also adapting to other connective tissues in this static form. So I'm going to put more weight on my back because I'm going to squat with 2 legs, and I'll probably get this adaptation. But you're going to get the same adaptations with 2 legs. You just have to do 2 reps, because if I can put 5 wheels on my back, but I can only use 2 wheels on 1 leg, well, like after 4 repetitions, I've now exceeded what I could do in 1 repetition, and I've exceeded what I would be able to apply from a force standpoint. So it's this inherent trade-off of good things and other good things, and et cetera. Now, as far as the safety of a back squat, and I have not changed my opinion from when Coach began his position on this many years ago. I said I agree with every single thing he's saying. I also think that people hurt their back in the squat because you are able to do what you think is technical proficiency, meaning get down to parallel or below and get back up and put it back in the rack with atrocious form. And most people let people throw their head back so you're looking at the mirror, which then puts even more extension into your spine. And that's why people get sore backs. It is so easy to do what you think is technical proficiency with way, way too much weight on the bar. So now, if you actually squatted safely with the amount of weight that you're supposed to be using, then it probably is a useless drill. But because you can squat with way, way more weight than what your body is currently able to adapt to, and you get up and down and everybody yells and screams and think this is the coolest thing. So I think that's the argument. It's not that this putting a bar on your back is this poor choice. I think it's putting a bar on your back with way more weight because it's forgiving to a degree. Like you can get up and down and think that you did a good squat with atrocious form. And who am I to say this? Well, I'm not the greatest power lifter of all time, but I wasn't bad and I was clean, unlike all the other guys I was competing against. So if I did what they did, I would have squatted 1,000 pounds in 2006 just like everybody else. So it was now when you train over years and you use great form, your body will adapt correctly and you'll probably still pay the price. So that's I think the suggestion is for most people, like there's no reason to not do single leg training versus double leg. The only obviously if you're a power lifter, Olympic lifter, but in basketball for our elite performer program, we use front squats because having the bar in that front rack creates connective tissue changes for the shooting position. And we only look for guys to be able to squat 135 because then we're looking for the soft tissue changes in the knee and the Achilles and the hip. We will use other things to go really, really heavy, but we will. But so at least that's my rationale because I think people just squat too heavy. That's the problem. So I almost think there's two very, very different discussions. Bilateral deficit is 100% you cannot. It is absolutely true. Now, is it squat versus rear foot elevated split squat? There's going to be very, very few times for strength training outside of powerlifting or strongman or whatever that there's any need to do it. Like the bilateral deficit will prevail. However, using the squat for connective tissue changes at moderate to light weights for time under tension, I think is got a place. But now you're going to put some 260-pound monster and have him squat 135. Like they're going to think they're not doing anything. And people don't want to win; they just want to do what they want to do. So that's my position on the whole on like the single leg versus double leg and bilateral deficit. I actually think they're two completely different topics.
Yeah, Charlie, just give us a guideline in terms of like, was there a standard that you're using with the 135? Is there like a whatever 0.5 0.75 body weight? Is there anything that you're doing with that?
No, just made it up.
Okay. Just want to get some weight on there to kind of create that connective tissue adaptation.
I think the verdict is in that you can become the greatest basketball players on the planet without like lifting a lot of weights. So I take now that doesn't mean you shouldn't lift weights. I'm like that's just how it is. It's Allen Iverson never lifted weights. You look at guys in the league right now and what do they really do in the weight room? So you could still be great. So I would prefer that we would have different types of opportunities to improve performance. So with that in mind, that's I just picked 135, as a way that would meet the how do I meet the culture and the science and the personalities at a great intersection. So if somebody wanted to do less than 135, that'd be cool. If somebody wanted to do 225, but we're not using it to get stronger. We're using it to create the connective tissue demands of the common injuries and motor skills of the sport.
I like it. Good stuff. Charlie, let's finish up. We've been we were talking earlier about some of this idea about the evolution of sharing information on social media. You and I were, and over time with some people, and you were talking about the art of debate to try to learn. But you're somebody who's always shared a lot of different information, not only training, but some personal. You take a lot of trips. You go to Disney. You're into wrestling. So you have like a really unique, varied portfolio of social media posts. But what is your take, kind of like where we're moving with? Because there seems to be like this idea of just there's so many arguments, et cetera. And where's your stance on that?
Well, here's the elevator pitch. So everyone should be allowed to say whatever they want. I find it really, really strange as to why people believe certain things or why do they keep listening. It's like I'm not offended that McDonald's exists. I'm offended that people keep going. And I have no explanation. Well, actually, I have an explanation, but it starts off with being just madly confused as to why people listen to other people. I would even challenge people like you should be able to say it. Like, why do you listen to me? Well, what you say makes sense. All right, cool. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people make sense and are completely buffoons. And because buffoons buffoons don't know they're buffoons. They think they're smart. They think they're normal. And now there's so many sources of information, whether it just be personalities or commercial models of education. They know this. And the other thing about buffoons is that they like being around clubs. They like being around teams. They like being around other people. And they're also very loose with their wallets. It's part of what makes them a buffoon. They're not smart about their money. So now if I can run a clinical education, Con Ed, I can run seminars that targets those people. Now I become popular because those people are so excited to become part of this group that all they're going to do is hashtag. And then it promotes and it promotes and it promotes. And everybody should be allowed to make money. Everybody should be, my social media is meant to make me money. It's what it is. It's also, but it's I find it really strange as to, why. I remember many years ago, I said to when Connor was working with me in the city, I'm like, I can't explain why another man does what he does. And from that point, I really shifted what I wanted to get better at, which was this, try to answer my failures and try to get to a point of, if anybody were to ever consider me a bad leader, like this is a person I have to answer that, because like I'm trying to, like, when we're on here, I want people to do what I say, because I believe what I'm doing is the absolute best that my searches have found. Like that doesn't make me arrogant. Like that makes me, like, everybody should say that. Like, if you don't think what you're doing is the absolute best, then why are you doing it? So like, to put that up against these buffoons is like this incredibly caustic clash, because if I can scientifically bury things because I feel like it. That's like my hobby. Like if I don't like something, I'm going to study it. I'm going to search it. I'm going to find unbiased resources, and I can blast it to bits because I want to be right. Like, it's important. But now I don't really care if these other people are still doing that nonsense. But once they ask, and then I explain, and then they still don't do it, they still don't change what they do, then I just throw my hands up. And that's where my social media then changed to putting pictures of Optimus Prime and Daniel Bryan, because I gave up. Like I just throw my hands up. It's like, oh my God. I mean, I also found that when you no longer shared this affinity for the same clinical models, you found that you weren't friends with these people anymore. Where like you weren't, and that tells me like you weren't friends with them to begin with. They were never friends. Like, if you only have one layer of relationship, like, you just know the person, you just have this one thing in common, you weren't friends. And I guess it's a little different with me because I think I have a lot of cool things that I think frustrate people that can't get to them. And so sometimes it's cool to take the other side of that one, because now people will listen to you. And for some people to do that, it was hard. I mean, I had people that they would come down from like Boston area and like spend days, and I would give them at whatever time they wanted. They would come train with us at old Tom Phillips gym. And then all of a sudden, he thought I was talking about him on social media because I was speaking, I say objectively / negatively about a model that he thought was really cool. And he calls me up on the phone, leaves a message and says, I'm going to keep calling you all night until you respond. And this was somebody who I I extended myself, all because of social media. And that's where, like, I'm gonna stick with this, like, speak when spoken to, and because I don't want to compete with the buffoons, and I don't want to find out that these people really aren't my friends, because it's this hard thing. It's not a good thing, and I think social media, like, anyone can say whatever they want, and they should be able to. Here's another good one. If people knew how many years of experience some of these messengers on social media had, I don't think they would even get the time of day. Like, if I told you so-and-so graduated PT school 2 years ago, like, I don't think anybody would value what they're saying to the degree at which they value now. They should still be allowed to post as much as they want. Or what so-and-so says at dinner versus what they say in the course. And I would never share that kind of information. But it's frustrating that's what social media has done, to where then things become personal, because we can't in our profession, it seems like it's very, very hard to separate being friends with someone and just being a colleague, because if you don't want, like, I have people that do CrossFit and people that are still in the NBA and things that I don't think highly of, but they're still my friends. And we just talk about other things. I've got somebody that owns like 32 physical therapy clinics where they see like 10 people an hour. And he's still my friend. We just don't talk about the other stuff. And it's very hard because social media brings us so close to all these different people. But then all of a sudden, once once I say no, don't do back squats. You only do real for elevated split squats. Now you're hated.
Yeah.
Well, that's like that would never happen without social media. So
True.
that's where the filter. That's why I wish we all had filters to be like, oh yeah, like it's McDonald's. I'll just drive right by.
Yeah.
No, people eat, and because they don't want to be challenged. They just want to be told everything they're doing is right, and they want to be told doing crunches is okay, and they want to be told doing back squats with 5 wheels on your back, and everybody yells and screams. In a Division I football weight room, and it's just like, what is this? Like, it's so strange. But these aren't bad people. These are not people that commit crimes. These are not people that rob banks. You just don't know them. They just do different things.
Yeah.
And without social media, you would never know, that they're a bad coach. Just because you're bad at your job doesn't mean you're a bad person. And that's very, very hard on social media to create that distinction.
Yeah. I love the Brene Brown quote that, and it's not completely true, but you can't hate somebody up close. Like, so in other words, really getting to know somebody and know that person, exactly what you just said is like, you can separate. Coach Boyle always like to say, separate, the difference between disagreeing and disliking, right?
Well, it's disagree or disrespect. And I'll take it to a different level. There's a difference between disrespect and just don't respect. There's difference. Like if I give you no emotion, like I don't even care what you do, that is very, very different than openly disrespecting what they do. That's where I'm at. Like it's disagree and disrespect can those are very, very different. I don't even care what you do. That means I'm void of respect. I don't respect or disrespect. I don't even care what you do because you don't affect me. And I think if we can get to that point, we'll probably find that these silly types of social media engagements are just that. They're very, very silly. And social media is a lot better for putting pictures of me and Optimus Prime together.
There you go. Well, Charlie, we've taken enough of your time, and this has been a great 2-part series. And you've always been so accessible. I will say, if you do email Charlie, he will get back to you. So you don't have to worry about arguing on social media. So, Charlie, thanks so much for spending so much time with us. Really appreciate it. It was great to catch up, and thanks again.
Cool, man. Thanks, everybody.
All right, that's going to do it for episode 252 of the Strength Coach Podcast. Remember, you can try StrengthCoach.com out for 3 days, just $1. Access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day. To access that offer, go to StrengthCoach.com. Click the Join Now button to get started on your trial. Special thanks to Chris Party and the folks over at Perform Better. Remember, right now they got the 20% off all of their best sellers, including med balls, foam rollers, ropes, dumbbells, kettlebells, everything. Next Learn by Doing one-day seminar is in Nashville. It's coming up this weekend, March 30th. Ian Jeffries, Martin Rooney, and Bill Parisi. And after that, it's in Baltimore on April 13th with Gray Cook, Josh Hinken, and Alan Cosgrove. You can check everything out at performbetter.com for all their products and info on their educational seminars. Thanks to Coach Boyle and Charlie Weingroff for sharing their insights and philosophies into the world of strength conditioning and performance enhancement. Thanks to Adam Doughty and Tim Robinson for the Train Heroic data-driven coaching segment. Head over to trainheroic.com to start your free 14-day trial. Let them know Anthony sent you. You'll get to save 10% off your first year of the Train Heroic Pro and Elite editions. Thanks to Rachel Cosgrove for the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment. Check them out at resultsfitnessuniversity.com. Frank Dolan and Functional Movement Systems. Check them out at functionalmovement.com. My name's Anthony Renna. You can go to continuefit.com for all the shows. You can also sign up for the Success Series. It's 5 audio interviews on success in the fitness business, which is the basis of my upcoming book. Thanks again, and I'll speak to you next time.